Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Sheena Burrell, the Deputy CIO of the National Archives and Records Administration. Sheena, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Jory, for having me.
Yeah, and when we talk zero trust, there's so many different ways to look at it here. I think this data facet of things is a really interesting way to look at it and kind of a unique way to look at it. But before we do that, let's actually look at what are some of the unique considerations for an agency like NARA when it comes to zero trust. Every agency's journey when it comes to zero trust seems to be a little different. So let's just hear your perspective on things there.
Honestly, I actually think that it's healthy that everyone's journey is a little bit different. I know that when legislation comes out, like for TARA, or when executive mandates come out, every agency is very focused on compliance rather than what's best for that individual agency. So for the National Archives, honestly, we are a smaller agency. And I think almost all smaller agencies will say that from a budget perspective, that's probably the most challenging thing. But for us, it's really kind of understanding that zero trust is more than just this philosophy, right? For cybersecurity. We need to be able to take our existing cybersecurity tools and new cybersecurity capabilities and integrate them together with the focus, like I said, on what's best for NAR and for our agency. I think the data perspective that you mentioned is key. NARA has a lot of data. We have to be able to protect that data. And Zero Trust really does give us the capabilities and that strategy. And we just need to be able, from a National Archives, to take a look at all of those different pillars of Zero Trust and figure out what's the best thing for the National Archives, where do we really start, and how do we get those resources to be able to build a Zero Trust architecture here at the National Archives.
Okay, well, let me just pull on that thread a little bit more because I think, other small agencies are in a similar boat as NARA. Are there general principles that they should keep in mind when it comes to standing up zero trust that larger agencies might not need to worry about quite the same way?
I think all agencies are going to have to really kind of look at this the same way in terms of what resources do you have, what are your existing tool sets that you're already working with, and what capabilities do you need to add in to have a good zero trust architecture. I think that for the most part, National Archives wouldn't be any different in terms of how we are doing our cybersecurity measures as, say, like an SSA, somewhere I used to work before. We all have a plethora of data, a lot of information that we want to make sure that we're protecting, but there are also different applications that we need the public to get on, or even in this environment now where we're all teleworking and we're working from home, we need to make sure that we have applications that our users at our agencies can get on, and it's not necessarily being restricted based off of just your network, but being able to see who is trying to get on to what application on what device. And I think all agencies have to be able to take a look at that.
Okay, and just one other thing you said that I want to follow up on here, that it's actually a good thing that it's not a one size fits all. Just elaborate on that point a little bit more of how this by necessity needs to be something that is custom fit to each agency.
So each agency may not have the same cybersecurity tools. I will tell you that the National Archives uses a lot of shared services for some of our cybersecurity tools. So there has to be an assessment, right, of what do you have today? Where are your gaps? And the gaps for the National Archives may not be the same gaps for a different agency, or a bigger agency, or even one of our smaller agencies or our micro agencies. Those gaps are going to be different. Those resources that you need in order to implement a zero trust strategy may look different. Being a member of the TMF board, I've seen a couple of proposals from multiple agencies for zero trust, and they all kind of look a little bit different. And it's not to say any of them are wrong. It's just that what needs for that agency may differ from the needs of another agency. And so everyone's zero trust implementation plan should be different. And I think that that's a healthy thing for them to be different because everyone's not starting from the same starting point.
Okay. And to really dig down into this data piece of things, how can data management in a cybersecurity context help NARA identify its high value assets and protect them accordingly?
Honestly, all agencies really need to know what and where high value data assets under their responsibility exist. In addition, I think agencies really need to understand and ensure that their high value data assets, no matter their form, are protected from unauthorized access or corruption. I think an unauthorized access or corruption while in their possession, right? And I think all those kind of goals that I just talked about can be achieved in the cybersecurity context by applying some of those data management principles, such as like discovery and categorization, cataloging, data masking, data redaction, and attributed based access controls.
Okay, well, let's continue on with that data management piece here because inherent to zero trust is knowing what the high value assets are and where they reside. So, how can data management from a zero trust perspective be a really key driver here?
I think that from an effective data management standpoint, I think agencies have to capture, their high value assets and they maintain a data catalog. We capture real time access information, use the data management processes. We allow agencies to understand what assets are accessed by whom and when and on their networks. Agencies can use data analytics and dashboards to present information to appropriate cybersecurity teams. I think that we are enabling better understanding of threat levels and being proactive in preventing threats when we have a better understanding of our data.
Okay, great. And just to clarify, the data catalog, is that like a data inventory or roadmap of here's where each piece of the data resides?
So I think the data catalog is more about um, the discovered data and how it's managed through the data catalog, and that's maintained. It's like a record of where and what information exists from a data standpoint. I think it's metadata and how it's updated and how it's aligned with your data lifecycle management.
Okay, got it. And so just to keep going here with this data thread of the conversation, how does data serve as a fundamental element of the rules-based access, which is again inherent to zero trust?
I think for rule-based access, that's one of the things that I was saying and talking about, that the logical conclusion is that if there is no inherent trust in a network, then the specific network used to access a system is really irrelevant, right? The access from the internet or access from an agency location is treated similarly. Therefore, access from at home or GSA or from a telework facility or agency location is really treated the same. Zero trust from a security framework requires that all users, whether inside or outside of a network, be authenticated, it's authorized, continuously validated for security configurations. Um, in a data enabled zero trust, we can really utilize rule based policies associated with high value assets as managed through data catalogs, as I talked about before. And this solution really enables us to use like related information to present, workforce locations or controls to those high value assets.
Okay, great. Well, I actually want to highlight something you said because I think it's really key to this conversation that, there not being any inherent trust to a user logging into the network. The same level of no trust is whether a user is logging into the network on site or whether they're logging on from, working from home or something. It's the same treated the same in both instances there. And I think there may be some, people who think, well, cybersecurity is a different landscape when it comes to a remote workforce or a workforce where they're teleworking. In this case, it doesn't seem to really be that kind of situation. No.
It's not. I think that one of the big, for us, especially for the National Archives, just to be completely candid, the National Archives wasn't an agency that was set up for telework. And because we weren't an agency that was set up for telework, um, our VPN had some connection issues, and it had some latency issues. One of the things and the pillars of Zero Trust is to be able to access your work via the internet is not necessarily being on, quote unquote, a network. And those are some of the pillars that we're exploring right now. How do we authenticate a user and not just inherent trust based off of that user, or inherent trust based off of our network, or inherent trust based off of the device that you're using, but taking all those things into consideration and being able to access information outside of your network and on the internet, because you have protected and put those layers of cybersecurity in place in order for you to have those controls that only you, Jory, can get on because you're Jory and you have a agency's computer, and you're coming from this particular IP address. Those are things that I think Zero Trust really do kind of work really well within this type of environment, especially for telework, especially for an agency like us who, are still trying to strengthen our VPN. And if, an employee cannot get onto VPN, can you get onto that application or work from home without it?
Okay, I think that was a really important point to underscore. So thank you for revisiting that part of the conversation. And of course, these are all considerations that any CIO or deputy CIO might have given the current state of things, but this is especially a relevant conversation given the Biden administration's focus on this from a policy perspective, the executive order on this. How have you seen that executive order elevate the role of data management in cybersecurity?
Honestly, I think that the Biden administration and the administrations before put an emphasis on our CDO role. We have just hired a chief data officer. We have the chief data officer council with OMB. And I think that as we continue to build our cybersecurity posture, the Biden administration having an understanding of the CDO role, having an understanding of cybersecurity, having a direct pillar for data within Zero Trust, and putting all those things together has really elevated that role of data management. I know here at the National Archives, again, one of our things is we house data. We house the data from all other federal agencies. And it makes it really important to categorize your data, to understand the metadata that's associated so that you're able to easily access that data and search that data. But it also means that we have to have really strong cybersecurity controls over that data as well. So I think as all of those different things play a part, the role of data management in cybersecurity has definitely been elevated through Zero Trust and through the CDO Council, and through just how um, people think about that access of data.
Yeah, CDOs, we're seeing them really gain momentum across government, and this is a really interesting role among many roles that they're performing right now. And what I really get from this conversation is that it's definitely a team effort here. It's, the CIO shop working with the CDO shop, working with the CISO shop here. It seems like a real coordination of a lot of different organizations putting their heads together.
Absolutely. One of the things that we have here at the National Archives, while our CISO is our lead for Zero Trust, it's really a combined effort. It's not only us within the CIO shop, we also have business as well. We have to have a understanding of how the business and how the philosophy of zero trust is going to change how the business does their work. We have a group of people that are working on our zero trust implementation strategy right now. It consists of the CTO, our chief technology officer, our CISO, the chief data officer, the CDO. It also includes our operations group, right? Those people who run our networks, and how our infrastructure will have to change to be able to support these changes from zero trust. And like I said, we do include our business stakeholders as well, because their access to information is also going to change based off of our new rules set up by zero trust.
Okay, and I feel you may have already answered this already, but are there other working groups that your agency is standing up? And how frequently do you guys meet? Because it seems to be a going concern. It could be every day if you really wanted to.
It could be. I think that one of the big things right now, those people, those key people that I just talked about, that is our working group. We've actually been meeting quite often. We meet on a weekly basis right now. Just we were really meeting on a daily basis to set up the implementation plan that was due to OMB. But then even after that, we're checking in on a weekly basis to talk about our budget as we get ready for FY 2024's budget cycle. We're now meeting as well to kind of prioritize and do a roadmap to say what should go first, what do we have already existing, and what are our gaps. So we've been meeting on a weekly basis to make sure that our implementation plan is solid. Again, this is more about what is the best for the agency and not necessarily only a compliance standpoint. Of course, we want to be compliant, but it is definitely about what's the best thing for us here at the National Archives.
We've been talking a lot about the what and the how, but let's focus a little bit on the who, being the narrow workforce here, because I think they're obviously a huge component of this. How does zero trust and data enabled zero trust, for that matter, how does that support a decentralized workforce, and how does it manage that careful balance between ease of access, employees doing their jobs, and of course security?
I think this is something we just talked about too, is that with zero trust, it really doesn't matter where you are. It shouldn't matter where you are. It shouldn't matter if you're on the network. It shouldn't matter if you're on VPN. It shouldn't matter that I'm Sheena Burrell, the deputy CIO. It really has to do with your access controls. It has to do with um, not having an inherent trust just because I am Sheena Burrell. It is multiple factors of trust before I actually am given access to a different application. I think that zero trust works really well in this type of environment and in the telework environment, again, because it is zero trust. It is not an inherent trust based off of who you are, where you are, or your device. And I think it takes all of those things into consideration to be able to apply trust to you.
Okay, and in terms of what is the role of data in network segmentation and determining what level of access users have under a zero trust architecture?
So for network segmentation, I think is a key part of zero trust. But it doesn't determine user level access. I think the purpose of the network segmentation is to allow only the network paths that are absolutely required for a system to function. I think the network is not trusted. It is treated as a hostile environment. Therefore, like network segmentation should be taken to the individual application level instead. I think it should be noted that like all data requires the same level of protection. Like clearly some data is more important and requires additional security measures, but specifically those afforded by network segmentation and other zero trust principles. I think each organization, though, really needs to determine whether or not these individual layers of security are required across the entirety of their enterprise, or if it can just kind of be implemented as part of a tiered approach to zero trust.
Okay. I actually want to change gears here a little bit and focus a little bit more on your role in the TMF board, because I think a lot of people look to the board, especially now in light of the $1 billion it had received following COVID spending packages. And that is, of course, resources that a lot of agencies would like to take advantage of, specifically for zero trust. So just tell me, from your perspective on the board, how do you see that fund being a vital tool in the tool bag here in terms of getting agencies up to speed with zero trust?
Absolutely. One of the big things, as I said, we've seen as a TMF board member, we've seen a lot of agencies who put forward TMF requests for zero trust architecture strategies. I will say the American Rescue Plan funds really supported that, because a lot of these zero trust strategies or even cybersecurity strategies may not have cost savings where you're able to pay back the traditional TMF loan. So we have different guidelines now with the American Rescue Plan funds, that $1 billion, as you talked about. So agencies are able to put together these proposals and have a minimal payback versus a full payback. So I think that's one of the benefits. I think if you look at the commulation of the board and who's on the board, you have Chris DeRusha, who I know will also talk about zero trust. We have Sean Connolly from CISA, who really wrote the NIST guidance and standards from a zero trust perspective. And as all of these different proposals have come in, we've had those experts be able to look at them, really kind of provide some guidance. And then even if they didn't really hit the mark, the TMF board is able to say, here's what you could do better, to be able to even put in a proposal again. I think that from a full federal government wide perspective, the TMF board knowledge base, the people who are on the board, the expertise, even the PMO's office, the program management office that helps support the board, brought in even more cybersecurity expertise to be able to help just the agencies themselves with the proposals around zero trust. I think that when we put out mandates, a lot of times these mandates don't come with funding, and the TMF board really does help to support those agencies who may not have, just a pot of money just kind of sitting around. So I think that the TMF board and the investments that we're making into zero trust and cybersecurity with those ARP funds is vital for the federal government. And I really do wish and hope that more federal agencies take advantage of those funds.
Right, right. And of course, $1 billion, you can really be glass half full, glass half empty on this. I choose to do the glass half full, say, my goodness, $1 billion, a lot of good you can do with that. But I do know that somehow agencies, the requests that the TMF board has gotten far surpasses that $1 billion. So naturally, there's going to be some projects that do get funding and some projects that don't. And this is a wide pool of projects we're talking about here. It's not just zero trust, it's IT modernization more generally, it's customer experience, it's a lot of different things here, all with a big value proposition. So I'm just curious, when these proposals do come to the board, how do you balance all these various considerations? Because a lot of good projects here, but just not enough money.
That's absolutely true. The way that we balance them again is we're looking at them from a broad perspective. Some of the things that you just talked about, modernization, the UX, cybersecurity. And we have people on the board who have experience in all of those areas. The PMO shop also has experience in those areas. But really, how do you balance them? As we have a scoring criteria, we have a mechanism to look at it to see if it actually meets the principles and values that the TMF board was established. I think that the other benefit to the TMF board is we are responsible for putting out playbooks, right? So while there are lots of agencies that have zero trust architecture plans, and may not know where to start or how to start or what's the right way to go about this, one of the things that's going to come out of any of the TMF uh, projects is a playbook. And as agencies start to implement zero trust, especially some of our bigger agencies like GSA or Department of Education, that those playbooks are really going to help smaller agencies as they go about doing their implementation of zero trust. So even if there isn't a monetary value that the TMF board can give to some of these smaller agencies or even bigger agencies, I think that the knowledge from the PMO and the feedback from the board on their proposals, as well as those playbooks, really do play a part holistically in the TMF's board's value to the agencies.
Okay, great. And just to take this beyond, the art of the possible and maybe hear some concrete use cases, and this may be putting you in the spot, I apologize. So are there agencies that have at this point gotten funding from the TMF to do zero trust?
Yes. And I'm just trying to make sure I'm giving you the right information at the right time. But yes, there are. And you can always go onto the TMF board's website and see those agencies that did receive funding, and what their proposals look like. But yes, there are a couple.
Okay, and I think it would be helpful for my audience just to again highlight this piece of it, the repayability of the TMF funds, because as it was originally envisioned, there's been an evolution on that. So just let's maybe underscore that, because I think maybe some agencies are a little hesitant or reluctant, not understanding that there's a spectrum of the repayability here.
Honestly, Jory, this is probably the topic that I love the most. So I will tell you that there's two different parts of the TMF, right? So there's the traditional TMF money that was appropriated by Congress a couple years ago in the, I believe, 2017 timeframe, maybe 2018. During that time, the TMF board received an allocation of funds, and everyone who applied for those funds had to do a full payback. So if I borrowed $100, I had to pay back that $100 within a 5-year period. With the American Rescue Plan, the TMF board received $1 billion and different guidelines for payback. So we're right now, what the TMF board does is that we always try to look for those cost savings and see if agencies do have the ability to pay back those funds. But if they cannot, we're asking, justifications on why you can't pay it back. That we're asking for partial payback, like 25% payback, 50% payback, and we kind of talk about even minimal payback for some of these as well. But that is a consideration by the board based off of the proposals, based off of return on investment and cost savings.
Okay, that was really helpful. Thank you for underscoring that. And, it occurs to me that, again, recognizing the different use cases here, um, cybersecurity may not seem like a likely candidate in terms of the repayability, but of course, I think back to agencies that have gone through cyber incidents, and of course, the recovery of that is a substantial, spending in terms of dollars there. So I think it's preventative in a lot of ways, if you want to look at it that way, in terms of the cost savings there.
Yeah, I think that you're absolutely right. I think one of the things that what you do for the TMF board is if you do have cost savings, we take those cost savings and say that's kind of the money that you would use to pay back your TMF board, or the board. However, if you have cost avoidance, kind of what you were just talking about, um, it's hard to kind of get that cost avoidance money to be able to pay back the board, and the board understands that, and the PMO, which they do a great job of really kind of looking at the agency's budget, because we do have OMB budget officers on our PMO shops board as well. And we're able to look at that to say, really, is there an ability for an agency to pay back?
Okay, and then one further element here in the TMF, again recognized $1 billion. The money is I think three-quarters spent at the time of this conversation, and there's still about $750 million left to spend. Again, a ton of money here, but what's the timeline for the rest of those funds to be awarded under, again, the American Rescue Plan?
So we would love to be able to award those funds by the end of this fiscal year. And the TMF board is working really hard to be able to do that. We're looking at all of the proposals that have come in as soon as, so March of last year, March of 2021 is when we received those funds. And we're really looking to try to allocate all those funds by the end of the year. But we have gotten through all of the backlog of proposals that were submitted last year for those funds, and we're really trying hard to make decisions as quickly as possible.
Okay, great. And one last piece of the TMF segment of this conversation, tying it all back to the beginning, NARA being a small agency and not having some of the advantages that some larger agencies might have in this regard. What could NARA, how could NARA benefit from funds from the TMF if it were to receive them specifically for Zero Trust?
So it's a really good question. And it's a good question because we have submitted a TMF proposal for Zero Trust, but we were denied. Even though I am on the board, I am recused from voting for myself. But the reasons why we were denied were were good reasons, honestly. I think that again, it's a philosophy for Zero Trust, and it's looking at your current capabilities and your existing capabilities and seeing where your gaps are and where you could really apply those funds. I think the benefit for NAR by putting together our proposal and getting denied was the support from CISA. We're actually next week meeting with OMB and CISA to talk about how we can improve our strategy for Zero Trust. And I think that, again, are those intangible benefits that we get from the board and from submitting TMF proposals.
Well, I like that there's a positive outlook of that, even though the proposal didn't get funding. Would you be at all comfortable with sharing at even just a high level some of the reasons of why that proposal was rejected?
Absolutely. So some of the things that it was rejected for was because the capabilities that we put together wasn't necessarily, we put this together really like really rough, right? It was as soon as the Zero Trust mandate came out, it was prior to the guidance from OMB and CISA. And so really what we were doing was saying, here are all of our different cybersecurity strategies, even including data loss prevention. It was different pieces in terms of multi-factor authentication and PIV, all those different pieces that we had yet to really kind of implement fully. And it wasn't necessarily a cohesive plan, it was more so pieces of our plans. And as we were able to sit down and really give OMB our plan, that's when it kind of came together and formed something better. But the feedback from the TMF board also helped us to create a better implementation plan that we were able to give to OMB. What the TMF board really kind of came back with was, we want to look at this a little more cohesively instead of just multiple cybersecurity initiatives that could be standalone initiatives, and how does it fit within your whole Zero Trust architecture, also taking into consideration some of the things that we talked about in terms of network segmentation, in terms of our data management. Those were some of the pieces that the board came back with as recommendations.
What I really like about that is it wasn't just no, it was no, and here's why, and here's what you can do, and here's what you can do. And it was really a comprehensive and forward-looking way of narrative saying, sorry, you're out of luck. It was actually a comprehensive way of what NARA can do next, which I think is interesting.
It was, and they also offered help from CISA and said, you know, hey, if you want help on how to do this, let us know. And I did, and I said, you know, I really do want help. I want us to be able to get better in this area, and so we were able to take them up on that offer.
Okay, great. And to circle back to the data element of all of this here, how can data, what I really see the data piece as here is providing visibility into the network, which I think is crucial under zero trust. And so with that in mind, how can data play a critical role in continuously monitoring network activity and raise a red flag in cases where there is, anomalous activity on the network?
So I think it's a really good question. I think that we can continuously monitor data access and managed data patterns and access patterns for abnormal behavior and various data science and data analytic solutions by using those. I think data in the form of logs and metrics are key in identifying anomalies. I think one of the simplest metrics but it's an often overlooked metric are user activities and how many times a specific user took a specific action. I think this provides really foundational information to identify anomaly activities. I think it also helps to alert the application team to new use cases for systems or help the team to better understand how users are using a system and how, what are their practices. However, I think activity might also indicate credentials or device compromise and attempts for data exfiltration as well.
Okay, well, we have certainly covered a lot of ground here, and yet, there's certainly other elements of zero trust that I feel we probably might not have gotten to, but that just speaks to how big a topic it is. Is there anything within zero trust that's worth bringing up here that I didn't think to ask you about yet?
One of the things that I really am looking towards from multiple agencies' perspective is how zero trust and new EIS will work together, especially since people are changing network providers and how you can work with those new network providers to start implementing zero trust as you go through and change out your data circuits and how you're looking at that. I think that also helps to bring in um, segmentation of your network, those type of things through EIS. And so I am really kind of looking for how those things are going to play together in the future, as well as the data aspect.
Okay. And, of course, this has been a really comprehensive conversation, but, are there any key takeaways that our audience should glean from this conversation, just to put a bow on everything here?
Just to put a bow on everything, I would say that every agency should really look at this, not necessarily only from a compliance standpoint, but from how will zero trust make their particular agency better? What are those efforts that are the best for your agency? And to do those things that are not necessarily just from a compliance standpoint, and really kind of integrating your existing cybersecurity tools and new tools to be able to make a good zero trust framework that's specific for your particular agency.
Okay, and actually just one other thing I want to circle back on here, to again underscore the importance of all this. Every agency has their high value assets here. NARA especially so. You said that, NARA of course has records from every agency, and these are impressive holdings here. Is there anything that you want to give us in terms of an impression for our audience of just what the high value assets of NARA are really like?
The high value assets of NARA. I think that one of our high value assets, again, is what we talked about, is it are holdings for other agencies. It is our permanent holdings as well as temporary holdings for agencies. And all of that data is within those two high value assets. Right now, those high value assets are built on a Siebel platform and they're going through modernization. It was actually one of the TMF board approved projects that you will see on that website for modernization of our two high value assets.
Okay, and maybe one last question here. There's obviously a lot of robust conversation around zero trust. It's on everyone's mind, understandable. But I imagine there's in the course of that conversation some misinformation or some common misconceptions about zero trust. From a myth busting standpoint here, is there anything, any pet peeves you have that you really want to take the opportunity to say it's really not like this at all?
For zero trust, I would say to not so one of the big things here, I guess, for us, and just kind of talking with the business, especially as I said, we're trying to move away from VPN, is to say that everything will be on the internet and it won't have these different security controls is actually the opposite. We would like to have more security controls just because it's on the internet. Doesn't mean that, does VPN totally go away with zero trust? It could, but we definitely have a ways to go before we get there. And I think that is one of the things, especially for my agency, especially because we've had some trouble with VPN, where everyone's like, zero trust, we're moving away from VPN forever. We never will have to be on VPN again. And I'm not sure we're quite there yet. It is not necessarily a myth that we're busting, it's more so maybe. It's a maybe for right now.
All right. I think a really important point there. And Sheena, thank you for really leading a conversation that has been far ranging here, but very valuable. I'd like to thank today's guest, Sheena Burrell, the Deputy CIO of the National Archives and Records Administration. I'm your moderator, Jory Heckman, and you're listening to Federal News Network. Now let me send you back to the studio for more on the Zero Trust Cyber Exchange.